Welcome to the Catholic Midlife Podcast, where we address the challenges and the opportunities of midlife from a uniquely Catholic perspective. This is the time, my friends, for a deeper renewal of your Christian vocation. Come and enter into the freedom of Christ that allows you to be the person you were created to be, because there's an amazing, awesome, exciting next season of life waiting for you.
Hello, welcome to the Catholic Midlife Podcast. I'm Curtis. I'm here with Karen.
Hi, everybody. And we have a listener comment today for the podcast. A listener wrote in and said, "Thank you so much for your podcast. Every week it has a little something that I need for that week." So that was very encouraging. And thank you to the listener for reaching out to us.
That was a great comment. So thank you for that.
So what is our podcast all about today, Curtis?
I thought you were the one that knew what it was about.
Oh, are you telling me you showed up? You didn't know?
I know. It's about values.
Excellent. Excellent. We're going to do one more episode on values, everyone. And really, we'd love to lead you through a whole values exploration process. It's something we do with our clients, and obviously it's a little hard to do it on the podcast. But by all means, if you'd like to sit down with one of us for a few sessions and do some great values work, we love this topic. So we're going to spend another day here just kind of outlining what you can do with that list of values that you're creating and that hopefully you have coming out of last week.
You have a list of values, or you could have one.
Yes.
I think it's helpful to break them down by area of life.
Okay.
Now, you can do some core values kind of work too.
Yeah, that's more about who you are and identity.
Overarching.
Yep.
But in the area of career and work or spirituality or your primary relationship, family, there's a number of areas of life where it's helpful, and your list is going to vary.
Sure. So Curtis, I think one of the things that's really common when people do like these little values exercises is they create their list. Maybe they've got a list of 10 values, but like nobody ever tells them what they're supposed to do with it. And it just goes away somewhere and gets lost. So I think today we should talk about, well, what are you even supposed to do with this list? How's that sound?
That's great. And I'll say that some people who are living very powerful lives have very clear ideas of their values, and it drives their priorities. They're living their life out of their values. So the idea of doing something with them really is important, because when you're living in conflict with your values or you're just making other choices, then it can be pretty tough.
Well, it's going to show up in your life.
It's going to show up, yeah.
That's for sure. So really, I think if you've got a little list of values and you're looking at them, you just want to start to notice when they show up for you and start to develop some understanding of how they're working for you. One thing that happened to me this week, I was talking with someone and they said, well, you know what? I'm going to order this book and send it to you. And then they started cracking up and they said, well, I just have this sense, maybe it's just intuition, I don't know, but I think maybe you like books. Gee, I don't know what gave this person that idea, but it's completely accurate. I like books. And really, if you collect things or you notice that there's something you are just drawn to and that you'll spend your time and money on, that's a value showing up for you. And books tie into a number of my values. And in any one situation, they can be expressing a particular value for me. So things you do with your time, things you spend your money on, things that motivate you and that you'll find some energy for, even if you don't have energy for other things. Those are going to reflect your values.
Yeah, the time and money are central. How do you value the way you spent your time already? How do you judge the worthiness of what you've been doing with your time or money? That's a strong indicator of your values.
It's really true that when you're clear on your values, decisions can become a lot easier and clearer for you. I have this family member who lives in a small apartment in a big city and doesn't spend money on stuff, spends money on experiences or investing in things that are important to them. And, that is a reflection of values, and it makes it a lot easier for them to make decisions about, what they're going to do and how they're going to do it.
If they had different value set, they probably wouldn't live in that small apartment.
Exactly.
In that big city.
They wouldn't even think about it. Yeah.
Like we would not think of that.
We wouldn't.
That's totally out of the question for us.
Yeah. So watch how you're spending your time, your energy, your money, and what values those things are reflecting for you.
Karen, I've been working on my values in the career/work area, as you know. And helping was and is a value.
Oh.
However, the other day, I was at this kind of church thing, and I wasn't totally impressed with how it was rolling. And I was thinking about that. I was being kind of critical. But then after the event, when it was my time to help do some put away and stuff, all my service instincts really kicked in.
Huh.
And I remembered, I like to serve.
Yeah.
I like to help people work under their direction to get them the results they want. And that's going to influence how I define this value of helping. I'd kind of forgotten how much I just like to be of service.
So let me ask you, if it's okay, what did it do to your mood or your thoughts when you started the helping part?
Oh, sure. Well, there I was getting busy. I was getting out of my mind, and I was just very happy.
Yeah. Yeah. So here, just by happenstance, you were starting to honor one of your values, and it shifted some things for you.
Yeah. So I was like, oh, yeah, this is great.
Yeah. So I think part of what you're saying is people who know their values know how to lean into them and use them and honor them in some key moments when it's really helpful to do that.
How about you, Karen?
Well, I kind of have an example. I have this hobby that I like. And when I think about what it does in terms of my values is I think, it really lets me be creative. And I never used to think I was a super creative person. However, it just took the right context and the right activity to get me into creativity and get me into a flow state. So what this does for me is it gets me into flow and it allows me to express creativity. And that's why I like it so much. And yeah, potentially I could find another activity that also honored that value. But I know when I spend time on that activity, why I'm doing it and what it's doing for me and why it's so refreshing. And so it makes me very motivated to intentionally use that in my life and make time for it because I know, okay, here's what it's doing for me that's contributing to my well-being overall.
Yeah, you said refreshing, well-being. It's really curious how exercising this value, which I think for a long time you never knew was actually important to you.
Right.
But all of a sudden exercising it really brought something out in you and in your life.
I agree.
And I think as you develop the person, it starts to translate across the entirety of the person. So for you to exercise your creativity, it's important. It's an important thing. It's more than just having fun.
Yes. Yeah. So as you start to pull out your values and see how they're showing up, that's when, as you were saying, Chris, you can be more intentional about utilizing them, using your values. And one example I think for us is, you like to kite surf. And so you're going to go on these kite surfing trips, and I don't kite surf. However, I like to go on some of your trips with you because I can get my sunshine in. I can sit on the beach. They're usually in a water area of some kind. I can get out of the house and have some new pleasant experiences. So there's a way in which certain activities can meet both of our values, even if they're not the same values.
Yeah, I noticed that you carefully qualified the water of some kind. Because we were out not too long ago down in South Padre, and Hurricane Francine was off in the distance.
Yes.
And we were on this muddy beach with this howling wind and light rain. And I'm like, Karen, are you going to come out and sit with us as we kite surf?
Of course not.
Of course not.
However, I got to go to the animal refuge area and learn about alligators and do a little bird watching. And I super enjoyed that activity.
Yeah. So, and there was some nice beach around there later, just not that site.
Yeah. Yeah. So really, I think it's very helpful. Like, let's say you're planning a trip with someone, could even be your spouse, and you're having some conflict about where to go, what to do, how to spend your time. If you can up-level the discussion a little bit and start asking, well, what is the value here for you? What are you trying to really get out of this? Let's chunk up a little bit. What are you honoring when you're saying, no, I don't want to do that. I want to do this. Because if you can get to the underlying values and be creative, there's a lot of things you can do to honor those values.
Right. So, Karen, you're planning a big trip with a friend. And I think there's this, it's not a dispute, but there's alternatives about the routes you're taking.
Yeah. So I'm very excited to set a goal to walk at least part of the Camino in Spain or Portugal. So I just did an initial bout of research, and there are, I think, up to 9 routes that you can take for the Camino, and they start different places and they take different paths to get to the end goal. And I noticed that the different routes have different characteristics. There's one that is mountainous, and it's the one that most people take. So it's very social, and you're going to connect with people and meet people from all over, and that's going to be a part of that experience. And there's another route that looks to be a little less traveled, and it's more coastal. So you're going to see, the water and the sea along your route. And there's, I think, some very, very beautiful areas of that route. And each one is going to have a little different flavor to the trip. So I thought, well, I think it's important for me and this friend to just talk about that and think through, well, what are the values that are going to be most important for each of us on this trip? And I think it's really a way to preemptively avoid conflict, because you're setting out the values you want to prioritize. And then you're asking yourself, well, how can we each meet these values in this trip? And it's kind of a check to make sure the trip's going to work for everybody. Are you going to get this value met if we do it this way? Or how could I get this value met if we take this route versus that route?
Yeah, and it's a basis for discussion of what we're going to do and why.
Yeah.
And I noticed that as you talked about those different routes and those different values, it just flowed into this idea of setting some intentions.
Yes.
For those different legs of the journey, having a vision of, okay, this is what I'm really trying to do. And no matter what happens, this is a value I can honor in this part of the experience.
Yes, exactly. It just makes your whole experience a lot more intentional, and I think more powerful when you do it that way.
Yeah, having the intentions around the activity, it's really very helpful. Mm-hmm. It reminds me of that trip you took this summer where there was a lot of rain and stuff and some obstacles, yet the group was able to find things that were of high value to them and say, well, yeah, it's raining in Paris, but here I am and I can do this thing and we can have a great experience. And some other time, maybe we could come back and do Paris in the sunshine and honor some, I guess, different values.
Sure. Well, it's not so hard in Paris. It's like,
There's-
I
you've
can't
got
sit
options.
outside in the garden. I guess I'll have to go find a wine bar and have some Parisian wine. Oh, bummer. That makes it a lot easier.
Yeah. Karen, something that's come up very recently for us, and really not for the first time, but we were just talking about it, how we've got some parents that are aging
Yeah.
around the 90-year-old mark, and a lot of ways they're doing great, yet at the same time, when you hit 90,
Yeah.
it
it's
starts to
different.
show. It starts to show. And we were talking about the need to really be intentional in this relationship and discussing things that are important to us about this relationship now. So like serving them, having connection, being present, perhaps supporting them in some medical and health ways.
Yeah. And when we started talking about that, we started to identify some of our values around that. And I think we need to do some more discussion and clarify what are our values to prioritize in this whole process. It's
Yeah.
gonna
And
give us
this
some
is going to
direction.
show up in how we spend our time and money.
Yes.
That's really I think the urgency of doing our values clarification so we can, get to that action phase of this process.
I think it'll help us, Curtis, especially as we get into some more sticky decisions. It'll really make them easier if we've laid out what we're prioritizing and what it is we want to value and uphold. And I think even in a broader sense, when you get the whole values thing and you've got it working for you, it's a huge influence on conflict in relationships and even internal conflict. I mean, when you have a decision and you're conflicted internally, if you could ask yourself, well, what are the values I'm trying to uphold and create in my life right now? And are they integrating well, or do they seem to be running up against each other? And what can I do to get some congruence in all of that? Or if you and I are having a conflict about how to relate to any one of these issues that we've just talked about, it's always going to be helpful to say, well, what is it that you're trying to value right now? And what am I trying to value? Because really, if we can put those on the table and get creative, there are usually ways to meet all the values on the table in a good way.
That's right, Karen. It's really true. And that's a great tip for working with other people in personal relationships or workplace relationships. You're finding that, hey, there's some different values at work here, and just appreciating that other person has got a little different take on the situation and why. That can be a great place to start working out how to proceed.
That's a great idea. It actually makes me think of, values are so motivating. Like, for example, when you said, when I could tap into my helping value, it just changed how I felt about the whole thing and motivated me. And I can motivate myself with my values. And if I know somebody else's values, well, that helps me to motivate them. Think about your kids when they were growing up and all the times we tried to motivate them, and how often perhaps we were trying to motivate them from our values, what we thought would be important. And as you know, doesn't mean it's going to have the effect you want on your kid. But what do they value? And how can they tap into that as a motivator? How can I tap into that to pull them into their motivation about whatever it is?
So, Karen, I sat down to write my list of values around work.
Yeah.
And I wrote down about 10, and I looked at them, and they were all move away values, like my top 8.
Like what? Give me an example.
Shouldn't take too much time. Don't interfere with my hobbies. Don't be boring. And I looked at that and I just had to laugh, and I realized, I'm not really ready to make this list of values, because moving away from something is fine. I mean, that's fine as value. Yet it doesn't give you direction, because moving away from something, there's a lot of different directions. You want to a guiding star
Yes.
that you're navigating towards, even if it's, a kind of a vague thing.
Yeah. A really powerful value is always about what you want or what you're trying to create, and not what you're trying to avoid and move away from. And our values can have some move away from in them. And it's not primarily where we want to end up. So I think that's a really good point, Curtis, is that your values are your North Star. They're positive, they're exciting, they're motivating. And I bet when you come back around to those things, you'll be able to kind of peel the onion back a little bit and find the values that are underlying those statements for you.
Yeah, sure. Well, I did my big breakthrough session and was able to release a lot of that baggage and kind of let the stars come out and help me choose direction.
Yeah. Yeah. If you're saying a lot of I shoulds, I ought to, I have to, I don't want, that's all indicators that there's some baggage to be released. And once you do that, then, as you say, Curtis, your values can come forth and really flower and be what they're meant to be for you.
Yeah, there can be baggage or at least some conflicts. I mean, we all want to be honest. That's not a big challenge. However, if you find yourself saying, well, I ought to be honest, that means there's some kind of conflict is coming into play. Maybe there's something going on at work and you're just like, oh, should I call this out? Or what action is needed on my part? And that's why the shoulds and oughts are flags.
Yes.
Tell you, hey, what's going on here? What is it I really want? What am I really trying to accomplish? And what's the obstacle?
Yeah, good one. And what does honesty mean? How does it show up? What does it mean to me? At some point, you have to really clarify those.
Well, and you're going to be getting deep into the circumstances and context because other principles are going to come into play.
As we close here, Curtis, I just want to leave our listeners with the thing that we always say as coaches, which is always be curious. Always be curious. What's this coming up for me? Where's this ought to, should come from? What value could be coming up here for me? And what expression of that value brings me joy and satisfaction and clarity? So just always be curious in this process and evaluating and wondering. Wondering is a great attitude to have when it comes to questions like values. So thanks for being with us, everybody. If you have a comment, a question, a value you've discovered, we'd love to hear from you at thecatholicmidlife@gmail.com. Have a great week. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for being here with us. The Catholic Midlife Podcast is for anyone that wants to receive the abundance of life that God has for each one of us. Take a moment right now to tell a friend about us.